They called it the project of the century, a plan so huge it would literally remake the world. China's Belt and Road Initiative, a modern-day Silk Road designed to weave continents together with threads of steel, concrete, and capital. The promise? Shared prosperity. New highways, ports, and power plants that would lift nations out of poverty and kickstart a new era of global connection. But behind the glossy brochures, a very different story started to leak out. A story of crushing debt, of sovereignty being signed away, and of local communities completely left behind. From the strategic waters of the Indian Ocean to the very heart of Europe, this grand vision is now sparking fierce geopolitical battles, leaving a trail of controversy and conflict. The project of the century is facing a global backlash. So what went wrong? Section 1. The Grand Vision, a World Remade. Let's rewind to 2013. When Chinese President Xi Jinping unveiled the Belt and Road Initiative, the world definitely took notice. It was a vision on a breathtaking scale, inspired by the ancient Silk Road that once connected China to the Roman Empire. This time, though, the ambition was global. The plan was split into two massive arms. First, the Silk Road Economic Belt, a huge network of land corridors, railways, highways, and pipelines, stretching from China through Central Asia and the Middle East and right into Europe. Second, you have the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road, a chain of ports and coastal projects creating a sea route from the South China Sea all the way to Africa and the Mediterranean. For developing countries, the sales pitch was almost impossible to resist. China promised win-win cooperation. It would bring the money and the engineers to build the infrastructure so many nations desperately needed. In return, these new arteries of trade would supercharge economic growth for everyone. Around 150 countries and over 30 international organizations have signed on. And what was in it for China? Well, the motives were pretty clear. Secure its own energy and trade routes, find new markets for its massive industrial sector, and, of course, expand its geopolitical influence on the world stage. The goal was to weave China into the very fabric of the global economy, creating what they called a community of common destiny. For a while, it seemed to be working. Cranes filled the skylines in cities from Karachi to Piraeus. The promise of an investment that would eventually top $1 trillion seemed to be laying the groundwork for a new world order. But once the dust started to settle on these massive construction sites, the true cost of all this progress became painfully clear. Section 2, The Unraveling, Case Studies and Controversy. That dream of seamless connection quickly slammed into a harsh reality. And the first cracks started to show, not just in the concrete, but in the bank accounts of the countries that signed up. Our first stop is Sri Lanka, home to the project that has become the poster child for the dark side of the BRI, the Hambantota port. Built with over $1 billion in Chinese loans, this deepwater port was supposed to be a booming hub on one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. But the ships just never came. With revenues nowhere near enough to cover the huge debt payments, the Sri Lankan government was stuck. So in 2017, it did something that sent shockwaves around the world. It handed the port and thousands of acres of land around it over to a Chinese state-owned company on a 99-year lease. Critics didn't wait. They immediately labeled it debt trap diplomacy, accusing Beijing of deliberately drowning countries in unsustainable debt just to seize their strategic assets. While some analysts argue Sri Lanka's own economic failures were a big part of the problem, the Hambantota case became a powerful warning. Interestingly, while the port struggled for years, recent reports from 2024 and early 2025 show a major jump in cargo volumes as it pivots to become an energy hub. Still, the controversial lease remains, and even though loan repayments were paused during Sri Lanka's default, the port's control is a major flashpoint. Now, let's travel northwest to Pakistan, home of the BRI's flagship project, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. This is way more than just a road. It's a multi-billion-dollar network meant to give China a direct shot to the Arabian Sea, letting it bypass the crowded Malacca Strait. On paper, it was going to revolutionize Pakistan's economy and fix its chronic power shortages. But the reality on the ground? It's a mess of complex and deep-seated conflict. Pakistan's national debt has skyrocketed, and a huge chunk of it is owed to China. The project has been constantly attacked by insurgents in Balochistan who see it as a new form of colonialism, exploiting their resources without helping the local people. And then there's the fact that CPEC cuts directly through Kashmir, a territory that's fiercely disputed between Pakistan and India. For India, this isn't about economics. It's a strategic move to surround them and a violation of their sovereignty. This has turned CPEC into a permanent geopolitical fight, making regional rivalries even worse. While Pakistan and China are now talking about a Phase 2 focused on tech and industry, the core problems of debt, security, and regional tension aren't going anywhere. And this story of grand plans and messy realities plays out in Africa too. In Kenya, China funded and built a modern railway from the port of Mombasa to the capital Nairobi. It was celebrated as a symbol of a new era. But the railway was supposed to go all the way to neighboring Uganda, connecting the landlocked country to the sea. That last crucial part was never built. The railway just stops, hundreds of kilometers from the border, making it economically questionable. Kenyans are now stuck with billions in debt for a railway that doesn't go where it promised. This growing frustration isn't just about debt, it's about sovereignty. In 2018, Malaysia's new government hit the brakes hard on several big BRI projects. Why? Because the deals signed by the last government were seen as shady, wildly overpriced, and a threat to the country's independence. After some tense negotiations, some projects were brought back, but at a much lower cost. It sent a clear signal. These countries weren't just going to be passive takers. They had a voice, and they were starting to use it to push back on deals that didn't serve their interests. These stories, from Sri Lanka to Malaysia, reveal a pattern of problems that have come to define the first decade of the Belt and Road Initiative. Before we explore how this has escalated into a global power struggle, if you're finding this analysis valuable, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Your support helps us create more deep dives into the critical stories shaping our world. Section 3, the Global Backlash, Geopolitical Chess. Now, all these controversies didn't just happen on their own. They poured gasoline on the fire of a growing geopolitical rivalry, turning an infrastructure plan into a high-stakes game of global chess. Leading the charge against the BRI is the United States. Washington and its allies don't see this as a charity project. They see it as a clear strategy for expanding China's military, political, and economic power. They warn of debt trap diplomacy and the danger that a commercial port today could become a Chinese naval base tomorrow. This rivalry has fractured global trade and is forcing countries to rethink their alliances in a world that's splitting into competing sides. The West is trying to offer its own alternatives, like the EU's Global Gateway and the G7's Build Back Better World. But so far, they're just dwarfed by the sheer scale of the BRI. Closer to China, the resistance is even more intense. India, a regional powerhouse, has been one of the most vocal critics from day one. The China-Pakistan economic corridor cutting through disputed Kashmir is a red line for New Delhi, which it sees as a direct challenge to its sovereignty. India looks at the BRI's network of ports in neighboring countries like Sri Lanka and Bangladesh and doesn't see economic aid. It sees a string of pearls, a strategic encirclement designed to box in its influence in the Indian Ocean. Tensions have gotten even worse with allegations of Indian-backed groups targeting CPEC projects as part of a wider shadow war to disrupt the corridor. And over in Europe, that early optimism has pretty much evaporated, replaced by some serious skepticism. While a few countries like Hungary are still all in, many others have gotten very nervous. Italy, the only G7 nation to ever formally join the BRI, officially pulled out in late 2023, which was a huge symbolic blow. The European Union now officially calls China a partner, but also a competitor and a systemic rival. Brussels is worried about the lack of transparency in BRI contracts, unfair competition from subsidized Chinese companies, and the potential for China to use its economic power for political blackmail. All of this also exposed just how fragile these long trade corridors really are. Strategic analyses of hypothetical conflicts, like one between Israel and Iran, show how easily these routes could be shut down, cutting off China's land access to key markets and energy supplies, and threatening the whole strategy. The BRI was meant to create a stable new world order with China at the center, but instead it's become tangled up in the world's most dangerous conflicts. Section 4, the evolution. Is the BRI failing or adapting? So, with a trail of debt, local anger, and intense geopolitical opposition, is the Belt and Road Initiative collapsing under its own weight? Is the project of the century a failure? Well, the answer, as of 2025, isn't a simple yes or no. The BRI isn't dead, but it's definitely changing. Look, Beijing isn't blind to the criticism. It's heard the backlash, and the whole strategy is now evolving. The era of the billion-dollar megaprojects is giving way to a new phase. President Xi Jinping himself has called for a pivot toward projects that are small and beautiful. This new small and beautiful model represents a major pivot. The focus is now on smaller, more targeted, and less financially risky investments. Instead of just massive concrete projects, the new buzzwords are green tech, digital connectivity, and public health. We're now seeing a rise in projects like solar farms, e-commerce platforms, and healthcare cooperation. This shift is both smart and strategic. Smaller projects are less likely to create those giant debt burdens, which lowers the risk of political backlash. They are often better at improving local lives, which directly answers the criticism that the BRI only helps Chinese companies. And by focusing on green energy, China is trying to position itself as a leader in sustainable development. The Digital Silk Road and Health Silk Road are now key, extending China's influence into the critical arenas of technology and global health. But don't think for a second this is a full retreat. As of mid-2025, cumulative engagement has actually topped $1.3 trillion. Recent data shows investment hitting a record high, with massive new deals in energy and mining, especially in Africa and Central Asia. This suggests China is playing a dual-track game, publicly pushing the small and beautiful idea while doubling down on huge projects in strategic sectors where there's less political heat. So while the branding has softened, the core ambition of securing resources and expanding influence is very much alive. The BRI isn't failing, it's adapting, learning from its mistakes and becoming a much more sophisticated tool of Chinese foreign policy. From its spectacular launch, the Belt and Road Initiative promised to reshape our world. In many ways, it has. It has built desperately needed infrastructure and created new pathways for trade. But it's also left a huge wake of controversy. Its first decade was basically a clash between a grand vision of global unity and the harsh reality of debt, political friction, and intense rivalry. So, the story of the BRI isn't a simple tale of success or failure. It's a much more complex story about massive ambition and forced adaptation. We've seen how projects from Sri Lanka to Pakistan became flashpoints for local anger and global tension. We've seen how a blueprint for cooperation sparked a global backlash, led by powers nervous about China's rise. And yet, the project continues. It's evolving from big and bold to small and beautiful, shifting its focus to tech and green energy while still hunting for strategic resources. China has proven that it's learning, adjusting its strategy for a world that's become far more skeptical of its plans. The Belt and Road Initiative has permanently changed the global landscape. It has redrawn trade maps, created new spheres of influence, and basically set the stage for a new era of great power competition. The conflicts it has ignited, over debt, sovereignty, and strategic power, aren't ending. They're just entering a new phase. The story of the world's largest infrastructure project is far from over. What do you think is the future of the Belt and Road? Is it a pathway to prosperity or a road to ruin? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And for more deep dives into the forces shaping our world, make sure you are subscribed and have turned on notifications. Thanks for watching.